Hello, LifeQuest. We are on the LifeQuest Facebook pages, and we have a special guest with us today, Dr. Lewis Krain, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about him. But this is our guest speaker at noon on Wednesday time, and we're so glad that we have such interesting and diverse group of people to speak to LifeQuest. Today, our special guest is not a stranger to LifeQuest. He has taught about his topic on mental health before, but this will be slightly different. I want to tell you that Dr. Krain bopped around between Michigan and Little Rock quite a bit, but he started off as a Parkview graduate and then went to University of Michigan in Ann Arbor for college, came back to UAMS.
Oh.
Wait.
So Leah is frozen for me.
Uh-oh. All right, keep going.
Do you want me to go ahead and start talking?
Nothing like some live presentations. Okay, Lewis, I think let's go on and try to get you. I think Leah is back on as well.
Okay.
All right. Oh, Lewis, you're still there, aren't you?
Yeah, no, I'm still here. Leah froze up. I could go ahead and start if it's okay.
Yes, let's go on and if you don't mind, go on and start your presentation. Okay. Are you ready for your PowerPoint?
I am ready.
Okay.
Okay. So let me get up here. All right. First of all, thank you guys for having me. I'm very excited to talk to you today. My name is Lewis Krain. I am a geriatric psychiatrist. I practice at the North Little Rock VA. And I also teach both medical students and residents at UAMS in the psychiatry department. So I'm going to talk today about some issues of cognition and memory. A couple of disclaimers before I start. Number one, I am an MD, and whenever I get out and start talking to people, people always ask me some questions about themselves and what I think they should do. My answer today for all that is going to be, you should talk to your doctor about that. I can't give you any medical advice myself. I'm happy to talk about stuff in the abstract, but I can't tell you what to do about your specific thing today. Number two, if you're a neuroscientist in the audience and you study the brain, you study behavior, I'm super excited to have you here. This is going to be kind of a simplification of some of these concepts since I only have 30 minutes to talk about it. So I welcome your input, but don't be surprised if I don't hit it at exactly the detail that you really love, but roll with me on that. All right. The most common thing that I get asked, and I believe that my mother is probably here in the audience today, so hi, Mom. I get this question all the time. Is there a problem with my memory, or is there a problem with someone I know's memory? And I'll get stories like, Mary got lost on the way to the grocery store. Is there a problem with her memory? Or Frank's water got shut off because he didn't pay the bill. Is he having a memory problem? First of all, if your name is Mary or Frank, I apologize. I'm not picking on you specifically. Those are just very common names. But this is a really complicated question. Is there a problem with someone's memory? And I want to talk about some ways to think about memory sort of broadly and what I call cognition. I'm going to touch a little bit on the concept of dementia and like Alzheimer's disease, but it's not really a presentation about Alzheimer's disease. It's more a presentation about how our brains work to process information, which I find a really interesting topic. All right, so on a step back, what do we mean when we say memory? What are we talking about? And one of the things that I want to sort of stress is there's a technical definition of memory that's a little different from the way we tend to talk about our brains and the way our brains work. And I want to highlight that. So here's Oxford Languages, which I just Googled, memory, the faculty by which the mind stores and remembers information or something being remembered from the past or recollection. And I want to contrast the memory then with a different term, which I call cognition, which is the action or process of acquiring knowledge, understanding thought. And really this definition here, which is perception, sensation, notion, or intuition, the processing of information. And so for the purposes of the way I think about the way our brain works, memory is storage and retrieval of information, specific things that we put in kind of a filing cabinet and then take back out. Cognition then is thinking, knowing, and solving problems. And so a lot of times when someone says, is someone having a problem with their memory, what they really mean is, are they having a problem with their cognition? Is there a cognitive problem? And it's important because our brains do a lot of different kinds of work. And there's other kinds of cognitive work that are not memory, which is, again, the storage and retrieval of specific information. There's what I call visuospatial, which is the mental map, your understanding of the layout of your body and the world around you. There's mathematics and doing math and calculation. There's planning out things and doing things in the proper sequence, paying attention and being focused on things. There's language, speaking and writing and understanding the way people are communicating. And then there's the process of interacting with others and understanding what other people want and are feeling and are thinking about. So that's what I call cognitive work. Now, the brain does a lot of other things also. And those are things that are not cognitive work. And so I'm not going to be touching on today about emotions, which is processing affect and emotional stuff. The basics of sensory processing, which is hearing, seeing, touching, feeling, the senses that we have. The basics of movement and coordination, how we get across the room, how we make our body walk or reach for things. And then basic physiological control, how we control our breathing, our heart rate, our body temperature, things like that. But I am going to focus on this, which is what I call the cognitive work. And so again, the question is not, oh, is there a problem with my or somebody's memory? It's really, is there a problem with somebody's cognition? And I want to break down how cognition works and the different processes by which our brain uses this information. And the way I think of that is in a thing that I call cognitive domains. And so I break down the work that our brain does into different cognitive domains. And these are the ones that I'm going to use today. And then I'm going to list them all. And then I'm going to kind of walk through them individually. So memory, and that's where we started from. But I'm just focusing on memory as a specific sort of storage of information. Verbal and language, processing language. This includes understanding the language that people use to talk to us. This includes making language and also receiving language, reading and writing. Visuospatial, which is the mental map of the world around us. A broad category called executive function, which includes planning, sequencing, our motivations and our inhibitions and filtering things. Math and calculation, social cognition, which is interacting with others, and attention and concentration. So I'm going to walk through some of these relatively specifically. All right, again, starting with memory. Memory is the storage and retrieval of information. And so I have here a filing cabinet, and I really think about the memory as a big filing cabinet. So when we have pieces of information and we don't need them right now in the moment, we put them in the file cabinet, and then later we take them back out. It can be long-term or short-term for that. So I'm getting a question, can looking at the hardening of arteries in the brain with an MRI give an indication of levels of dementia? That's a good question, and I'll answer that when I talk about the broad framework in just a few minutes. Memory can be long or short-term. So this can be years, or it can be the past couple of days. One of the questions that I often get when I'm working with patients with dementia is that, oh, my loved one seems to be able to remember like where he went to high school and the bicycle that he had as a kid, but he can't remember when he did yesterday. And that seems strange to people because we think of memory as sort of fading into the mists in some ways. That's actually not how memory works. Memory works kind of like a muscle. And the more you use that muscle, the stronger it is. So our older memories, the ones that we replay in our heads, are actually the strongest ones. The distant past, the really emotionally important ones, the day of our graduation, the day of our wedding, the day our kids were born. These are the memories that are strongest and stay the longest. What we had for lunch yesterday, or an activity that we did last week, those things are a lot more recent. Another way to think about it is paths in the woods. The more you walk a certain path, the more you wear down that path, and it is reinforced in the pathways, as opposed to someplace you go just once in your yard. It's hard to follow those footprints. So again, when we think of memory, I want you to think of this file cabinet. Visuospatial, this is the mental map of our world. And I have here a map of Little Rock, although really it's more specific. One way to think about this is, you're watching me on the screen right now. That screen is your visual processing. That's just your vision. Now I want you to close your eyes and imagine how you would walk to your bathroom from where you're sitting right now. Don't actually go to the bathroom, but just think about it. That's your visuospatial. That's your mental map. The map that your brain holds that understands what the world around you is like. You can open your eyes again if you're not, by the way. It's really important that we have that, because that tells us how we get places, how we do things. Getting up in the middle of the night to move in the dark, that's all of your visuospatial. It also includes your understanding of your body position. How would you touch your nose with your left hand if your eyes were closed? Where is my body in space? Some of that is sensory information, but also you have you're holding in your mind right now a mental image of where you are in space and how you move around that. That visuospatial is really important. Language and verbal. So this is making and understanding language. It includes both written and spoken language, as well as multiple languages. A lot of times people will tell you that they know the language well when they start thinking in that language. And so these are the different processes by which we take in speech and make it into either something else, or decide what we want to say and which words we put on it, that kind of thing. Word finding difficulty is a common feature of dementia. And again, this should not be confused with memory. And so sometimes they'll say, oh, grandpa has forgotten my name, or grandpa has forgotten the word for these things, which makes it sound like memory. It's not actually memory. It's your verbal ability. You've lost actually finding the word for that thing. And this is key in communicating with others clearly, but also understanding our own thoughts. Attention and concentration. This is our ability to focus on specific tasks or subjects. And so whereas I talked about the filing cabinet for memory, this is the desktop before that. So when I want to use a specific piece of information, I take it out of the filing cabinet and I put it on the desktop, and I use it in that way. I can only have so many things on the desktop at once before I lose track of stuff. And some people are better at having more things on the desktop at once. But when I'm done with that piece of paper, and I know I'm going to need it again in a week or a month or a year, I take it off the desktop and I put it back into the filing cabinet. And that's how we move things with attention and concentration from the moment into the storage, and that's into and out of memory. Another way to think about that is, on the computer, and we're all using our computers right now, files that we have open right now on the desktop versus files that we have saved somewhere in memory. The file that's open, that's our current attention and concentration. When we save it and close that file, that's putting it into memory. It's really important that we make that distinction, because failures in attention and concentration look much different than failures in memory, which are failures of storage and retrieval. So losing concentration on something is not the same thing as forgetting it. It's almost like not having had it in the first place. So sometimes people will tell me, oh, I forget someone's name as soon as they tell it to me. When I meet someone new and they'll tell me their name is Joe, and then just a minute later, I don't remember that. That's not actually a problem with memory. That's a problem with concentration. And if you track what they're doing, you've asked what that person's name is, but then your mind is already on something else when you hear it, and you never actually put that piece of information into storage. So you didn't forget that person's name. You actually never really processed it in the first place. And the answer to these problems is often paying more attention to what you're doing in the moment. Calculation. So this is basic and advanced math. This can range from arithmetic to more complicated math to calculus to all that kind of stuff. So your ability to do math should not be confused again with concentration. So concentration, sometimes people get lost in the math problem, right? Confused about what they are doing. That's something different than actually having trouble with calculation. But calculation is math, adding, subtracting, division, that kind of thing. Executive function is work that our brain does. This is a broad category that involves sort of running our cognition. It's deciding what to pay attention to and how to do it. So executive function has multiple parts to it. One part is planning and sequencing, deciding what to do and in what order to do complicated tasks. So if you enjoy cooking, for example, cooking is a classic executive function task. It's a list of things that you have to do, and if you want the product to be correct, you have to do it in a certain order. So if you are making, I don't do a ton of cooking, so I say, but in some things, if you add the eggs before you add the flour, you mess up your recipe. And so that would be a failure in both the planning and the sequencing of that thing. You have to do things in multiple order. Another good example of this is preparing a big dinner for multiple people that has multiple things you're making. Starting the main course at a certain time, and then the salad, and then having the dessert ready later. That's a planning function and requires multiple things to be done in the right sequence. So that's what we call executive function. Executive function is also the motivator. This is also the thing that gets us to do the things that maybe we don't necessarily want to do right now, but really need to. So for example, as excited as I am to give this presentation right now, if you'd have asked me this morning, I would have preferred to have slept in and just spent the whole day in my PJs. But I did. I got up, I got dressed, cleaned up, and I'm doing all the things I have to do at work. That's my motivator. That's executive function pushing me to do those things. Anytime that you're like, well, I would rather do X, but I should do Y, so I'm going to do it. And you kind of take that big sigh and get yourself up and do that. That's your executive function motivating you to do something. The other part of executive function is what I call the filter. And here's kind of a coffee filter. These are the things that we shouldn't do that we keep ourselves from doing. So when you really want to tell your boss what you think of him or her, when you really want to tell that person in front of you in line where to go, when you really want to use a certain word that you're not supposed to use, the filter is the part of you that keeps you on track from saying those things. And that's a part of executive function. Anytime it's the motivation is the shoulds and the filter is the should nots. This, of course, is a really important part of being successful in life and being able to function. Also different from memory, right? And so the filter is a really critical part. There's a social cognition. I'm going to not spend a ton of time on social cognition. It gets complex and starts to look somewhat like executive function. But this is how we interact with other people and our understanding of other people. It hits on a concept sometimes called theory of mind, which is our understanding that different individuals than us have their own thoughts, wishes, and desires, and that they don't necessarily perceive things or want things that are the same as we want. It's really important to have this concept if you're going to interact appropriately with other people. It's a little bit different than executive function. We often look at kids, we talk about theory of mind developmentally. Young children don't always have this, right? They think the thing that they like is what everybody likes, or what they want is what everybody wants. And they don't really understand quite yet that there are differences. But social cognition is a really important part of everyday function. So we have those categories. And I just let me flip back for a second for that list. So these are our cognitive domains: memory, verbal and language, visuospatial, which is our mental map, executive function, planning, sequencing, motivation, filtering, math and calculation, social cognition, and attention and concentration. So memory becomes just one part of our overall cognition. And what that means is when we decide, we ask ourselves, does someone have a problem with their cognition? You need to understand exactly where they're falling down. Where is the deficit? So in order to understand the problems, you need to understand the cognitive domain to which those problems are related. And how do you do that? You ask them. So when someone says, for example, so we go back to our initial question. Oh, Mary got lost going to the store. The first thing I say is, I want to hear a lot more about that. What exactly happened? So if Mary got in the car and then started driving and then could not remember why she got in the car, That is a memory problem. She forgot that she was going shopping. She forgot why she was going to the store. But what if she remembered where she was going to the store? So I say, Mary, what were you doing? Well, I was going to the store. Where is the store? Well, it's the Kroger on Beechwood and Kavanaugh. What were you going to get at the store? Well, I was going to get eggs and milk. Her memory is perfectly fine. She remembers all that. So what was the problem? Well, I just couldn't figure out how to get to the store from where I was. I took a left and maybe it was supposed to be a right, and then I was too far. And then I couldn't figure out where I was in relation to the store. So that's a visuospatial problem. She remembered exactly what she was doing, but she didn't have the mental map to get to the right place. So Mary's problem is with the visuospatial aspect, not with the memory. And you need to understand that if we're then going to decide what sort of problems she's having. Sometimes people say, well, I was going to go to the store. Okay, which store? The Kroger on Beechwood and Kavanaugh. What we're going to get? I was going to get milk and eggs. What happened? Well, I got it. So I started driving and I took a left, which is the right way to go. But then I started thinking about the other things. Well, I also need to get some paper towels. I need to get some paper plates because I'm going to have guests later. And then I remember that I had to pick up my kids from this different place. And I remember that I had to process some tests. And before I know it, I had passed Beechwood and Kavanaugh and I was down on Lee and University and I just had totally missed my turn. So in that case, Mary remembered where she was going and she had the map, but she was distracted on the way to go there. And that's a failure of attention and concentration. She had too many things on her desktop in that moment. And she let those things pull her away from the task that she was supposed to be doing. This is a common problem in people who don't have dementia or memory problems, but really just have what I call just having too much on your desktop. And the approach to that is simplifying things a little bit and staying more focused. And that's an issue of attention and concentration. But you can see where if we just say there's a memory problem, then we really have lost track of our ability to classify what these problems are. We'll go back to Frank, right? Frank got his water shut off because he didn't pay the bill. And again, I want to know why. What happened? And again, if he forgot there was a bill altogether and the bill just didn't exist to him anymore, that could be a memory problem. And we're talking about Frank's memory. But maybe he paid the bill wrong. Maybe he wrote out the check for the wrong number, or maybe he deducted the wrong amount of money from something. That then becomes a math problem or a calculation problem. And that is a separate cognitive domain. Now we need to think about the different math problems that could go on with that. Or maybe Frank remembered he had the bill and knew how to do the math, but just couldn't get himself to write the check. It just didn't seem that important today. It didn't seem that important yesterday. It's not going to seem that important to him tomorrow. And he's never done that before. That's never really been a problem. He's always been good at doing the things he should do. And now we're talking about executive function, which is the motivation to do things. And sometimes people, they're processing the information correctly and they remember it, but they just can't get off the chair to do the thing. And we call that amotivation. And that can be a failure of executive function. And again, that is very different from the aspect of memory. So really, we want to be thinking about not just, oh, the bill didn't get paid, but we really want to understand why didn't the bill get paid? What happened that really kept that from going to completion? All right, so that is what I want to say again about classifying cognitive disorders, classifying cognition and memory, categorizing those things. I want to turn it over to some questions and see what you guys think and ideas that you have about this kind of stuff. So I'm going to stop sharing my PowerPoint now.
I'm with you as well. That was very, very good. I didn't even think about. So when we go to a psychiatrist with your background, and I'm sorry I got cut off in explaining what that is, but I hope you picked up the pieces. The reason why they're asking levels of questions is you're looking for what cognitive domain the problem is. You're getting to the root of the problem by through your questions.
Right. So it's an issue of classification. The end result, which is again, the bill didn't get paid, or I lost, or I didn't get to the store, or I don't know that person's name. That's not nearly as much information as which of the steps from leaving the house to getting to the store, which of those steps did I fall down on? That's really what tells us what's going on in that person's brain. The second part of this, which I talk about medical students, is that each of those domains lives in a specific part of the brain. The brain, is not just sort of one sort of homogeneous blob of jello. Different parts of the brain do different jobs. And so as I begin to say, like, oh, there's math problems, that lets me know where in the brain the deficit is. And then different illnesses are associated with that part of the brain. So the diagnosis really links down into where the problem is.
Yeah, where is it located?
Yeah. So somebody asked, how would I treat someone with executive function failure? So this is a good question. So one thing is, and it depends how severe it is, the first thing you can do is you can shore up executive function in certain ways. You can build yourself, you can write yourself notes, you can set yourself deadlines to do things. You can sort of reinforce with yourself the importance of doing certain things. So external executive function reminders can be really helpful. Sometimes I'll have people, if it's problems with sequencing, so I talked about planning and sequencing, is I have them sit down and write down exactly what order they're going to do the steps in. So before you just start looking at the complex recipe, write yourself kind of a new version of the recipe that says 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and work through it that way. Make yourself a schedule. So, the salad needs to be done at 1 p.m., but the roast needs to be done at 1:30, and then the dessert needs to be done at 2, and you have it all laid out that way.
Mm-hmm. I have a question. My father-in-law passed away several years ago of a very aggressive, and this is into the dementia category, not necessarily general memory and cognition, but he had a fairly aggressive form of dementia. And my mother-in-law realized years before she was noticing some behavioral changes in irritability, sleep, mobility, appetite. Are there signs like that maybe we should be alert to in our partners or our parents, whatever stage we are?
Yeah, absolutely. We tend to come to cognitive diagnosis actually relatively late in the process. And so a lot of times we start asking these questions, are there problems when people are getting lost going to the store, or when they're, misplacing things around the house? There can be a lot of subtle signs even before that. And that can be irritability. It can be changes in behavior and personality, those kinds of things. One of the big things that I always deal with is sometimes people come in and they'll tell me, well, doc, I'm having this, and this, but that's just me getting older. And there's a lot of confusion about what's normal aging and then what is the kind of pathology that goes along with cognitive problems and dementia and stuff like that. And what I usually say is, why don't you tell me what's going on, and then we'll talk about what is normal aging. It is natural to have some changes in memory. It's to have some changes in concentration. But data shows pretty well that our overall cognitive ability remains pretty solid as we age, absent some process like dementia. So I always encourage people to go in. There's some very sensitive tests that you can do. We call it neuropsychological testing. It's kind of like a 2 or 3 hour battery that will really look at your memory, your concentration. It'll break it down into all these categories. Your visuospatial, they'll have you drawing little figures and copying little numbers and that kind of stuff. And I like actually to get that relatively early so that we have what's called a baseline function for someone. And so then in 5 years, if they're having memory problems, we can go back and compare it. Because one of the problems is different people will score very differently on those tests, throughout, just in terms of their own skill, their own cognitive strength, their own education. And so it's useful to have an early test of those kind of things.
So everybody took up Sudoku a few years ago, and crossword puzzles, anything, exercise, we've also heard. Any other tips and tricks you might share to keep our brains sharp?
Yeah.
Attend life quest classes is what I would say, but.
Absolutely. So one of the things is, so people often ask me, how can I avoid dementia? What can I do? And so one of the things that I will say is, all the things that your primary care doctor tells you are good for your heart, exercise, diet, watching your cholesterol, watching your blood pressure, all of those things are good for your brain too. And so the easiest thing is listen to your primary care doctor when he or she tells you what to do. The two things that have really solid data that really delay the diagnosis for dementia are exercise And then there's some evidence for, like you said, sort of brain exercise. Sudoku and crossword puzzles are the two primary things. There's also really, it seems like almost anything that we do. The brain, like I said, is a muscle, and the more we use that muscle, the better shape that is in. The next category is diet, and there's some evidence that some diets are better than others for brain health. There's no specific single diet that we've really identified that's better for your brain in terms of dementia than others. But again, what I would say is watching your weight, watching your cholesterol, watching your blood, all those things, I think, contribute to a healthy brain, and that delays dementia. There's a huge connection between dementia and heart disease. And we know a lot about preventing heart disease. And so I would go at it that way.
Got a
Some
question
filing
here.
cabinets bigger than others. Yes. Some people, so once you start breaking down these cognitive domains, one of the things that you see is that different people have different strengths and weaknesses. You see some people who are very strong verbally, just naturally, and not as strong visuospatially. There are some people who tell you they get lost going to their own bathroom, and that's a bit of an exaggeration. But some people, never get turned around anywhere, and some people have trouble finding the way to the store. So we all have natural strengths and weaknesses in these cognitive domains, and that includes memory. And so some people's filing cabinets are bigger than others, or not even that the filing cabinet is bigger. Some people are better able to find the information again. If your filing cabinet is too big, sometimes the question is not, is the information in there, but can you retrieve it properly? So if I filed my taxes, instead of under T for taxes, but under A for annual taxes, and then someone goes to look for, I go to look for it under T for taxes, but it's under A, then I'm not going to be able to find it. And so sometimes the question is organization, not just filing. But naturally, all of us have strengths and weaknesses within these cognitive domains. That's one of the reasons why I kind of like getting early cognitive testing for folks, because it lets you sort of then lay out where your individual strengths and weaknesses are. And then in 5 years, it lets you go back and compare those things. And somebody could say, well, yeah, this person didn't score very highly on visuospatial, but you know what? They didn't score very high on visuospatial last time either. And that's probably just kind of who or where they are. I'm a psychiatrist. I do a lot of talking. My verbal scores have always been very high. But again, I'm one of those people who gets lost going places, and I'm terrible at remembering faces. I can meet people and then a week later just not remember that I have, that face. And so my visuospatial is naturally somewhat weak. That doesn't make me a smarter or dumber person. And I really want to stress that, none of these hit at the concept of absolute intelligence, right? All of these are sort of strengths and weaknesses things, but you can be good or bad at any of these things, and that doesn't really reflect your sort of natural intelligence.
So we've all been so careful with public safety and social distancing during this pandemic year, and I'm just wondering, in your practice, if you're seeing some tolls of social isolation on memory and cognition or other issues, and what we might be able to do about it.
I'm not seeing, not in terms of memory and cognition. Now, again, I separated out affect and mood, and it also hits anxiety. And I would say that this year has been very difficult in terms of mood, which is in terms of depression, in terms of anxiety. And I will say that a lot of people, as their routines have gotten disrupted, that can affect their ability to exercise, to do hobbies that get them out of the house more or get them more active. And so I do see like a reduced level of activity. But in of itself, the changes that have gone on with COVID haven't really affected cognitive ability as much as it's hit people's ability to kind of manage their lifestyle. And that's more mood and anxiety. But it has been very hard on those things.
Okay. Dave has a question.
Okay, often hear that learning foreign language helps prevent dementia. Do you think this is true, or to having a new language improving and no foreign language also help? So this is a really interesting question. So in of itself, I would say that learning a new foreign language does not necessarily prevent dementia. I do think that anything that uses your brain sort of helps that. Now I will say this. So there's some studies that looked at does level of education affect getting dementia later in life. And it does seem that educational level does seem to affect our diagnosis of dementia later. Now, it's interesting, and I usually do this in a classroom setting, and I have people guess what level of education would you guess is protective for dementia later in life. So take a moment and ask yourself this. Just answer to yourself. I'll give everybody kind of 5 count and say to yourself, if you had to guess what level of education protects for dementia, and I'll go through 5, and I'll ask Leah to say what she thinks since she's right here.
Hey, when I think about what?
What level of education would you guess is protective for dementia later in life? Like what kind of schooling would you say it protects you?
Higher. Gina's giving me a hint. The higher the schooling, the better.
So most people would guess, like college or graduate school. It's actually educational preschool.
Oh, that was my
presence or absence of kind of a preschool activity that was educationally oriented versus sort of just daycare or that kind of thing. And what that says is the foundation of our brain is really built in the first 2 to 5 years of life. We really build, if you think of your brain as a house, the foundation of the house is the most important thing. And then the structure we build on it later is secondary. And so people who have multilingual people often picked up those languages in early life. And I think that's less that the language is protective than it indicates that they were using their brains at a high level pretty early on in life. And that is protective. There's nothing that says that a second language of itself is protective. And the other thing is, again, the more you use your brain, the healthier it is. But I think like when we say, I'm going to do Duolingo and learn another language, that's going to be good for my brain, or I'm going to do a Sudoku thing now. I think some of those programs oversell what exactly we know about protecting the brain. It's always good to keep your brain active, but I don't know that we can say that any one of these apps or any one of these activities is really going to keep you from getting Alzheimer's disease later in life.
All right. Well, we have time for one more question. If we have any, please type it in the chat. I really do appreciate. I'm always impressed with LifeQuest members. And when we are on Zoom, we're on 2 different Facebook pages, and we get just a variety of questions to challenge us, to challenge our brains.
Well, there was a question I got early on that you texted me, which is from Irene saying, can looking at hardening of the arteries in the brain with an MRI indication of levels of dementia? That's really difficult to do. We know when we look at sort of the aggregate of hundreds of patients that the worse shape people are in cardiovascularly, the more likely they are to have cognitive impairment. But I don't know that we can tell in any individual patient from an MRI or a CAT scan anything particular about what's going on in their particular brain. I sometimes look at what we call brain atrophy, which is to say, if you look at a brain, if you look at a CAT scan or an MRI, a CT scan or MRI, the brain should look nice and full and fill up all the space that's available in the skull. And sometimes when you look, it's not quite that full. It's smaller than what we expect to see. Some of that is normal and aging altogether, and some of that is more than I expect. And that indicates kind of that there may be fewer or less neurons in the brain overall. That is a very rough measure of how someone's brain is doing. I look at that, but really the diagnostics that I do are all kind of what I just walked you through today, which is, how are you doing in your life? What problems are you coming to? And then I make you draw some squiggly lines, and I ask you to remember some numbers. And sometimes I'll do some math backwards, all those kind of things. That really is much more value to me than any specific lab test or imaging test.
Okay, but what if math is not your biggest filing cabinet?
Well, again, I have to take that into account.
Asking for a friend.
Right. So we have a set of math questions that we know average people, even people who say they're not going to math. First of all, I'll say, when I say this, I say, now this is the part of the test that is a math test. How are you at math? Everyone says I'm terrible at math. So everyone believes they're worse at math than they are. So I kind of know that and take account for that. But again, it's also how you miss the math problem. So if I ask you to count backwards by 6s, and you miss 1 or 2 by 1 or 2, then that's not a big deal. If you go, 100 back by 6s and you say 94, 78, 53, that's a little more than just not being great at math, right? As opposed to if you say 94, 87, 80, right? Those are small errors. And so I take into account kind of the way in which you make those mistakes. But sometimes I'll ask people, starting from 100, can you count backwards by sixes? And they'll say 94, 86, 85, 83, 82, 81, 80.
Yeah.
And I'll say, oh, what are you doing there? And they'll say, well, I'm counting backwards. And then that's not a math problem. That's a concentration problem. They have lost the task that I gave them.
Right. Or they say, what did you ask? Yeah.
What did you ask me? Yeah.
I'm going to start practicing that one now. Dinah asks a question, what % of dementia is related to hereditary conditions?
So that's a good question and a thing that we do not have a solid answer for. One thing is there are multiple subtypes of dementia, which is, we all talk about Alzheimer's disease, which is the most common. There are vascular types of dementia. There's a thing called Lewy body dementia. There is frontotemporal dementia. Each of those is its own diagnosis and has its own heredity. So that's sort of like asking the question, how hereditary is cancer? Multiple types of cancer, and brain cancer is different than lung cancer, is different than this. So it's within individual dementias, you can answer that question a little more specifically. Now, even within Alzheimer's disease, there are hereditary factors, but those hereditary factors are not 100%. So, we probably have them best qualified in terms of Alzheimer's disease, and it's about 30 to 40% hereditary versus other factors. Now, there is like a disease called Huntington's disease, which some people may have heard of, and there is a dementia that goes with Huntington's disease, and Huntington's disease has a single gene, and if you have that gene, you have Huntington's disease, and then you'll have the dementia that comes with that. That is a very rare illness, and almost never do we get something that specific. What I will say is there is no dementia where we have a genetic screen that will tell you you are going to get this dementia and that kind of thing. And again, the best we have for Alzheimer's disease is that hereditary link, and exercise and what I was saying about protecting your heart still actually outweighs sort of the hereditary factors. And so when someone says, should I get the genetic test for Alzheimer's disease? What I say is, well, if you have the gene that puts you at risk for Alzheimer's, I'm going to tell you to exercise more, watch your diet, get your cholesterol and your blood pressure under control. So I'll save you $250. Don't get the gene test and go ahead and start now exercising, watching your diet, and get your blood pressure and cholesterol. Well,
it's a beautiful day, so we all need to put our jacket on and gloves and get outside and take a brisk walk. Come to LifeQuest classes, and like what everybody has done already today, and hear more from speakers like Dr. Krain. We have really taken advantage of your verbal communication skills today. I'm glad that is a large bucket in your brain, because we've learned a lot from you, and appreciate you as always for participating and sharing your information with LifeQuest. I'm glad we finally got a good internet connection so we could hear your presentation, and we did, and it was very, very well received. I appreciate everyone for participating. A large group participating with us today, and I really appreciate everybody for coming in with us. This is recorded. This is open to the public on our LifeQuest of Arkansas Facebook page, so feel free to share with friends and family. They may really appreciate the information, and we sure do. Thank you so much for taking your time with us today. Many, many people are saying thank you in the comments and to me.
I had a lot of fun. It was really fun for me, so I've enjoyed it.
Okay, appreciate you. Thank you so much, everyone. See you here next week at LifeQuest Entertainment from Rich Roy and his friend Kirk Furr, who are going to be picking and grinning and singing and playing with us next week at noon on Wednesday at LifeQuest. Thank you.